Meryl from Merrily Blooms. Happy holidays. Today we're going to show you how to put together a wreath from scratch. I know that probably sounds a little bit intimidating, but it's really not. Some of you have bought kits from us, make your own wreath kits, where we supply all of the tools, greens, decor, ribbon, etc. for you. But even if you haven't bought a kit from us, this video will help show you the whole process so that you can go ahead and buy the supplies on your own and even forage things from the woods to actually get the greenery that you need. So first we'll talk a little bit about the supplies that you're going to need. So the first thing is one of these box wreath bases. So this is very simply a wire frame. This one is 18 inches. I find 18 inches to be the most well proportioned for like your average size door. So that's definitely the size I would recommend. You can get these from Michael's, you can get them from Amazon, most craft stores you can get them, and they're relatively inexpensive. We're also going to use some floral wire. This is also called paddle wire as well. This particular one is a 22 gauge. What that means is just how thick and hefty the wire is. 22 is great because it's very easy to work with. It's not overly stiff. The gauge isn't super important, so if you already have some floral wire, you can just use that, but I'm just showing you what we use. Next, if you're making this by yourself without a kit, you'll need some snips. So these are floral snips that I use. You can get these off Amazon, or gardening shears as well, which most people have. You'll need greens, obviously, which we'll talk about. Scissors, regular scissors to use for your ribbon, as well as a zip tie and pipe cleaner, which is also for the ribbon. We'll get into that later. And then any sort of kind of decorative items that you'd like to place on your wreath. If you got one of our kits, we include some of those items, but honestly, we use so many beautiful different varieties of greens that the idea is that you don't really have to add a lot to make the wreath beautiful. That's really kind of the style I like to make is, you know, a wreath that looks really organic, natural, like you foraged it yourself. So with that, let's talk a little bit about the greens. So I usually would recommend maybe 4 to 5 different types of greens. I would say 3 minimum, just because it gives a lot of variety and kind of texture, style, color, because each green is going to be a little bit different. So I'll walk you through the different types of greens that I've selected and that are present if you got one of our kits this year. So this is called Oregonia. What I love about this green is that it has really nice soft white edges, so it adds a lot of dimension, which is great. So that's the Oregonia. Then we have Boxwood, which is pretty standard. Most people are familiar with Boxwood and love it. Just a really pretty green color. The leaves are really delicate and pretty. Then Noble Fir. So this is like your very, you know, typical Christmas tree kind of green. And it makes for a really good base of your wreath because it's very hardy. And then one of my favorites is this Incense cedar. So there are a variety of different types of cedar. What I love about Incense cedar is you can see these little yellow bulbs on the end, which are so pretty and just add a really nice layer of dimension to your wreath. I love these. Okay. So those are the different types of greens that we're using today. Again, you can use any type of green that you have, or maybe you're foraging for greens, that's great too. So what you're gonna do to start is you're going to make what I call little bundles of greens that you're then going to wire to your frame, which we'll walk you through all of that. So what I mean by a bundle is you're gonna take the 4 different types of greens that you have and create pieces that are a little bit bigger than the size of your hand, maybe 1.5 of your hands, and you're going to put them together to make a bundle. So what I like to do is I start with the hardiest greens. So if you have our kit, I would start with the Noble Fir. Then I would start with the Boxwood, because it's also sturdy and makes a good base. The other reason I like these as a base is because they're just solid green in color, and then I use the other two greens, which have more dimension and interest to them, on top so that they're really the focal point. So then I like to add the incense cedar. I don't recommend adding if you get incense cedar or any kind of cedar, I don't recommend adding that as the last piece on top, because you can see it's a little bit flimsy. So it will create a lot of movement on your wreath if it's the very last thing on the outside. So what I recommend is you do that as maybe the third thing. And then put something hardier, like the Oregonia, on top, because that's gonna really hold it better, and it kind of holds that incense cedar in place. So if you don't have one of our kits and you're buying greens, so you can basically go to any greenery and they'll sell you a bunch with multiple stems of greens. So you could select 3 to 4 different types, and then you can make your wreath that way. So what you're gonna do, if you do that, is you're just gonna go through and cut pieces from each branch. So this is like a full-size branch you would get, for example. So I'm gonna cut a piece like this. So about that size. What you wanna be mindful of when you're cutting the greens by yourself is you wanna try and make the most that you can from this particular stem. You don't wanna waste a lot. So you may end up with a piece that's kind of on the big side, and then you might like trim a little bit off of that. The other thing is, where possible, try not to leave a stem that has a lot of white. You don't want that showing on your wreath. So either snip it off or cover it with another green when you're at the wreath kind of making phase. But just be mindful of that as you're cutting, because you want to just make the most of each branch. You don't want to have weird random little pieces left that you can't, really do anything with. Although one tip is, if you do this by yourself and you haven't bought a kit from us and you're just buying these branches and doing this on your own, what I like to do is when I have leftover pieces, I save them, and I'll then use them for like window boxes or planters or things like that, because in that situation, it's easier to kind of cover things up if there's awkward pieces versus a wreath where it'll be really noticeable. So don't get rid of them, you can always use them. Or even just use them to place on like your fireplace mantle, little extra pieces like that. So if you're using your own branches that you forage, you're gonna cut those individual pieces. If you have a kit, they're already pre-cut for you. And so you're gonna go ahead and make multiple of those bundles. So it's easiest to just, hopefully you have a nice table space that you can kind of spread out. This does take up a little bit of room. Make all of the bundles that you have included in your kit, or if you bought the greens, make as many as you can. You can always cut as you go, but I find it's a lot easier to just have them ready and be able to place them on your wreath. So the bundling is what kind of takes a little bit of time. So if you did get our kit, you can go ahead and pause the video and then come back after you've made all your little bundles and place them out on the table. I've gone ahead and made the bundles already, so I'm just gonna proceed right into making a wreath. So go ahead and pause this if you got a kit and come back, maybe get a little wine refill, and then we'll walk you through how to put these on the wreath. Have gone and put your individual bundles together. I'm gonna walk you through how to put them on your frame. So the first thing that you're gonna do, oh, and by the way, before I forget this, if your hands are all sticky from cutting up or bundling your greens, whether you wanna do this now or later, to get the sap off your hands, just use a little bit of olive oil or vegetable oil, whatever you have in your kitchen. Put a little dab in your hands and then rub it on like lotion, and then you soak in water and it takes the sap right off. So what we're gonna do now is take your paddle wire and we're gonna wire it to the frame, and you're never gonna cut the wire until you've wired all the greens, because you're gonna just keep looping it around. So you're never gonna cut the wire until the very end. So first what we're gonna do is just kind of start the wire on the frame here. This is a step that's kind of awkward just to kind of begin with, and I'll kind of show you how you do it. If you got one of our kits, we just kind of started the wire for you, so you should be good to go there. So all I'm gonna do is take a little piece of wire, take the end of my wire here, and just loop it a couple times on the bottom here just to get it secured. Again, this doesn't need to look pretty. It's getting covered. Okay? And then this is a preference thing. I personally like to wrap my greens by wiring it from underneath and going over, but if you like to do it the other way, you can do that too. Oh, and one other quick point. Just to make sure, when you get the frame, there's kind of a little bit of a bump, a ledge. You want to make sure to put your greens on the bump side, okay? So this kind of shows you there's a little bit of a bump. The bump side is the side that's the top that you're using to place your greens on, which I know sounds kind of counterintuitive because you might think like, oh, this is like a little dish and I can just place the greens on here. But it's actually this ledge just allows you to go in behind the wreath and tighten the wire. So, I forgot to mention that part. Okay, so since I know I want to be able to go under to wire the greens, I'm going to go over to start the wire. So what I'm going to do, wrap this one time, 2 times, then up here, I'm going to use a little extra because I'm going to use this to hang my wreath later. If you forget this step, it's not a big deal because we can always add wire later to the top to make a little hook for you. So it's not a big deal if you forget. Okay? So I'm just securing that on a couple times. Okay? And then this piece is ready to go. So, now what you're going to do, have all your little bundles near you. So I'm going to grab one of my bundles. I'm going to place it at the top of the wreath. I'm going to hold it with my left hand. Now if you are, this is assuming most people are right-handed, but if you are left-handed, so I'm going this way because I'm right-handed, so it's easier for me to hold my greens with my left hand and to wire with my dominant hand, my right hand, because you want to be able to get the wire tight, so use your dominant hand. If you are left-handed, you're going to flip it. And you're going to use your right hand to hold, your left hand to wire, and you're going to go the opposite direction if you're left-handed. Okay? I'm going to flip it, because I'm not even sure I could do it the other way. I'm sure I could, but it would be sloppy. Okay. So you've got the little bundle, got your wire, and what you're going to do is wrap it tightly around the bottom. So you don't want it all the way towards the end, you want it about this close, okay? You want to wire it super tightly. And the reason is not only obviously to secure it on there tightly, but as time goes on and obviously your wreath is going to be outside, your wreath greens are going to get drier. And then what's going to happen is they're going to start to shrink. And as they shrink, the wire becomes looser. So you want to make this wire as tight as you possibly can so that in the future, a big windstorm doesn't take your wreath out, which is, as we know, always possible. Okay, and I like to do this 3 times for each bundle. Okay. This looks a lot more difficult the way I'm showing it because I'm trying to show you guys towards the camera, but when you have this flat on your table, I assure you it's a lot easier to do. So from there, what you're going to do is take your next bundle. This is again why I think it's much more convenient to have all your bundles already done and ready versus then having to put the wire down and the frame down and make a new bundle. This way you can just kind of get into a groove. One other thing, as we go, we'll kind of like pull out, tease out the greens and kind of zhuzh them. So don't worry too much about what's going on with the actual greens because we'll be able to keep kind of modifying those as we go. Next, you're going to take your next bundle. You're going to place it on top of the bundle before it so that you're covering the wire and the end of the previous bundle. Now, you don't want to go super far up because then, first of all, you're going to make your wreath really thick, and second of all, it's going to take you forever. So you want to overlap it and a little more than that but you don't want to completely cover. And then you're going to wire that. Same thing, about 3 times. And I'm going to show you one more bundle, and then I'm going to put it on the table and keep making the bundles go until we get close to the end, and then show you that part because it can get a little bit trickier. Okay. This is my 3rd bundle. And by the end, we'll know how many bundles we used. Wrapping it super tightly. And again, where I was talking about some of those awkward edges that you get with branches, this is the part too where before you wire it on, make sure that if you have an awkward branch in your bundle that you try and kind of cover it with one of your other greens. If you got one of our kits, you'll have extra greens as well, just in case of those kind of scenarios. So now, I'm going to keep bundling. And each bundle shape, you know, is going to be a little bit different, and then the size is going to be a little bit different, and that's okay. It doesn't need to look perfect. I know I said it before, but this incense cedar just really does it for me. It just makes the wreath look more expensive because it's got that little pop of like gold to it, which I think is so pretty. And again, you're not cutting off your wire until the very end. You're just going to keep the wire attached, which honestly makes it a lot easier than if you were individually wiring each bundle, which would be really time consuming. And the nice thing is if you're doing this inside, your house will smell lovely, like a Christmas tree, in case you don't have yours yet or don't plan on getting one. And if you get sap on your table, you can use oil for that too, to remove it off your table. I was so grateful when I found out that tip. I don't even know how I learned it, but I must have gotten it on YouTube or something, but it's so helpful because of course, as we're pre-bundling all the greens in the kits, there's a fair amount of sap going on. But luckily, our work is in our garage studio, so not a big deal to make a mess, which is nice. You can't worry about making a mess when you're being creative, or you have to try not to. I'm really happy with this combination of greens too. You know, trial and error of doing this for a couple of years, you kind of learn which greens do really well, which greens don't do as well, or some of them are really pretty but they don't last as long. So I try and, you know, create a balance of getting greens that are going to last long, like the noble fir and like the boxwood, but then things like the incense cedar that just look pretty, and even once they kind of fade, they're fine. getting towards the end here, sometimes you find, well, if you have some wine or a cocktail, maybe less of this, but if it's in the morning, like it is for me right now, you feel like you're deep in concentration as you're doing this, even though it's really not super mindful activity, but it's easy to just kind of get in the zone. Okay, so this is where towards the end, it can be like a little awkward where you almost are like, do I need like a bundle and a half, like a little extra? So this is where you may have to go a little bit tighter, a little bit closer up on the last bundles. And then I'll show you, I'll hold this up and kind of show you the last piece. Okay. So now that we're at kind of the end here, this is where it can be helpful if you have an extra set of hands, like you have someone you live with, or if you're doing this with a friend. It can be easier to have another set of hands, but you can totally do it by yourself, as I do all the time. So what you're gonna do is you're gonna lift, let me show you. You're gonna lift this little guy, which was your very first bundle at the very top. You're gonna lift him up while holding your wire with one hand, and you're going to slip this guy under and wire it, and try not to rewire your first bundle. Again, this is why it could be beneficial to have another set of hands, if possible. Okay? And then you can just move the greens from the first bundle to cover. And then this is where, again, if you've got a kit, you'll have a little extra greenery, so if you need to, I might add not a full bundle, but like a piece of a bundle. Because as you can see here, it's like I can cover it, but it's a little awkward. Like I'd like to have a little something extra. So I'm just gonna go ahead and add in one more little, like half of a bundle basically. Okay. All right, and then once you've looped that through enough times, you can finally cut your wire. So what you're gonna do, I always recommend the more wire you can give yourself, the better, because you can always cut more off. And again, I'm using these floral snips, but if you got our kit, you can just use scissors because this wire is really thin, and scissors, regular household scissors, work fine. So then what you're gonna do, and again, this is just like the beginning where it's a little bit awkward and there's no real wrong or right way to do it, but you're just gonna keep wiring it around that bottom hoop to just kind of like tie this off. And then when you feel good about it, you can always cut that piece off or wrap it around. And then find where the top of your wreath was, where the hook was that you did. If you didn't do a hook, no big deal, because now that you have your wire unattached, you can always use that to create a hook at the top for yourself. The other thing is, at this stage, so what I like to do is go through and kind of, zhuzh is the word I like to use. Kind of spread out the greens a little bit, make sure it looks even. Snip off anything that doesn't look good to me. If there's like an awkward little spot in your wreath where you're like, I feel like I need to add a little something here or there, this is the opportunity where you could also always just take your paddle wire and just put an individual piece of greenery in there and just wire it in the back. That's totally fine to do too. But this is essentially what it looks like before the bow and any decor you'd want to use, which I think is just beautiful. It smells amazing. Before we move on to some of the other steps for decorating it, One thing you can do, if it's a particularly dry winter, we don't get a lot of like snow or rain, or if your wreath is protected from any of that, you can always use a little water spritz bottle to kind of keep it fresh looking. The other thing I want to point out, because I've heard people did this by accident and didn't realize this would happen, so I'm going to prevent you from doing this. If you have like a regular door and then you have like a storm door or whatever in front of it, you want to put your wreath on the outside. Like you want your wreath to be outside and not in between two doors like a storm door, because what will happen is that the sun will just hit that storm door and hit your wreath, and then your wreath is contained and it's not getting any air from outside, and it will just fry your wreath. So your wreath will just be totally dead looking. So I hadn't even thought of that until someone told me that they took the class and they brought their wreath home and that happened. So hopefully we can prevent that from happening to you. So the next part is obviously to decorate it with a bow. So if you got one of our kits, we have pre-made the bow for you, because the bow making process can be a little bit tricky for some people. So we pre-made it and put a piece of pipe cleaner on it so that you just have to attach it. But I'm going to actually walk you guys through the process of how to make a bow so that you know how to do it yourself and can see. And if you have one of our kits, appreciate that you're not making it by yourself. But it's not that bad. It takes some extra steps. So what I like to do, so you're going to get some ribbon. It is way easier to make a bow where the pattern is exactly the same on both sides. Of course, I managed to not do that because I always just pick something that's more difficult. So like this buffalo plaid ribbon, for example, it looks like it's the same on both sides, but it's actually not, because one side is like fuzzy and the other side isn't. So it's a little bit more complicated. But regardless, it's totally possible to do. So what you're gonna do, I usually do like about 2.5 arms of ribbon, about 2.5. Better to be safe and do a bigger piece, because you can always make it smaller, but you can't add ribbon and then you might have a piece you can't really use. So what you're gonna do, the two tools that I use for this to make it from home is a zip tie, also you can get on Amazon or in craft store, and a pipe cleaner. Same. So what you're going to do after you've cut, you can just cut a regular straight edge on the ribbon. You're going to make a little loop like this. This is going to be the center of your bow. Okay? Now, essentially what you're going to do is you're just going to keep making little S's back and forth. Back and forth. It's that easy. Now, because I chose a ribbon that doesn't look the same on both sides, and obviously I want the fuzzy side to show, I have the slightly more difficult task of I have to flip the ribbon each time to make the side come up that I want to come up. Also, make sure to get wired ribbon, because it makes it a lot easier to handle. Non-wired ribbon is challenging and unnecessary. So the wire is just on each outside edge. So you're just gonna make these S's. I have to twist it back and forth because I have to make things more difficult. And hope that my excess ribbon dragging on the ground isn't picking up, dog hair. But that happens. Now, how many you do on each side is just, if you do 2.5 arms length, I think what we're gonna end up with is maybe about 4 on each side. You just wanna make sure you have the same on both sides. It'll just determine how big your bow is, but also how wide the ribbon is determines how big your bow is, so. Yeah, so we're ending up with 1, 2, 3, 4 on each side. Again, if you want more than that, just cut your ribbon longer than 2.5 arms. And then what you're gonna do, you're gonna take the excess here, okay? place it under your hand here. Okay, and cinch it like this. And then take your zip tie, put it through the top of your bow. This is where you want to make sure too that like the loose ends underneath here are really tucked under where you put the zip tie, because you want to make sure it gets caught in the zip tie and that it doesn't get left out. I'm going to zip tie it through. You want the knot of the zip tie to not be visible, so you're going to make sure the knot ends up on the bottom underneath where no one's going to see it. And if you screw this part up, you can always cut the zip tie off. If you get zip ties, you're going to get them in a big pack. That's just how they come. You can always cut the zip tie off and then just redo it. And then you're going to take the little tail of the zip tie and just cut it off. Regular scissors is fine. Okay. And then you've got your end piece here, and you're going to want to make two tails, so make it even at the bottom. Then I snip it across. And then what you're going to do is take the two ends at the bottom like this and cut it across so that, I made that one kind of awkward, but so that you have a nice looking little tail on the bottom there. And do that with the other side as well. Okay, you got two little tails. And then what you can do is, the great thing about the zip tie is once it's on there, this is so secure that then you can mess with it so that you can make it look the way you want. So you kind of fluff each little piece, and then I just kind of pull these little pieces apart like this. Okay. And you can do more of this kind of zhuzhing while it's on the wreath too, but I'm just kind of giving you like a sense of how you're going to do this. And I usually do it before and after I put it on the wreath, because once it gets on the wreath, it gets a little more smushed, then you want to adjust it a little bit. And again, if you bought one of our kits, we did this part for you, so all you're doing is placing it on. So then this is where I use the pipe cleaner. However, you don't really need a pipe cleaner. I just use a pipe cleaner because I have it, and so it's just easy to use, but you can use your paddle wire. You can just loop your paddle wire through and attach it on your bow that way. The pipe cleaner is just easy, and I happen to have it. So, and if you got one of our kits, it'll be on your bow. So what you're gonna do is just cover the zip tie, and then just take the pipe cleaner in the back and kind of twist it a little bit so that it's really attached to the bow. And then find the top of your wreath. And this is the other thing. If you lost the loop that you made to hang your wreath, that's fine. Or sometimes that happens because it's all green. Or if you look at it and you're like, actually, I kind of want the top to be over here, you can always just change your wreath. You know, you can flip it this way. You can just make a new little wire to hang it on the door. Or you might just hang it on the door on the actual, you know, like wire. So from here, this is where you can kind of get creative and decide kind of what your style is, what works with your door, how you're gonna hang it on your door. So there's a couple different options for how you could place your bow. So you could either do it on the top and then have the tails kind of hanging down, which is cute. You could do it on the bottom, which is also cute. Or you could do something more fun where it's kind of asymmetrical on the side like that. Okay? So you're just going to get in there and wire it. And you can even just kind of wire it to the top of the greens, whatever's kind of easy for you. It doesn't really matter. It's just getting it kind of on there. And then again, this is where you can, you know, further zhuzh here, whatever you like. So this is a really basic way to make a greenery focused wreath. If you then want to add further decorations from here, you can absolutely do that. So if you got one of our kits, we've included a couple different elements that you can add for design that I'll just kind of walk you through. And again, if you're doing your own thing, you can buy any type of wreath decor at like Michael's or you know, the dollar store. There are so many different places to buy wreath decor, or you can just make things that aren't wreath decor. So in your kit, we have pine cones. So these pine cones happen to be already wired, which is just super convenient. But if you don't have them already wired, I'll show you how to do that. So all you're doing is you're placing it on your wreath here, and you could just kind of take a branch, or you can wire it all the way around, and you just place it on and twist the wire. Okay. And then you can place them either one at a time, or you could do like some little bundles of like a couple pine cones. So just to show you that. You could also do little bulbs like this. So all these things are wired. So all you're doing is literally twisting it around the greens. And then it's easy to manipulate. We also included these little berries, which are also wired. So let me show you how these work. So what you do is you just kind of use a branch and just twist the little berries around. Those are cute. And it's a nice little pop of red if you like traditional kind of wreath colors. So it adds that little berry kind of touch there, which I think is nice. Okay. So it's really up to you how you kind of want to customize it and design it beyond this point. It's really just, it's your personal style preference. I usually like just a really nice natural green wreath with a bow, and I kind of call it a day. Maybe I'll have a little berry, maybe a little pine cone. That's it. Oh, let me show you real quick, if you don't have a wired pine cone, how you wire it. So take some of your paddle wire, cut off a piece, and then all you're gonna do is wedge the wire. Pine cones are so easy to just wedge in the bottom. Okay. Make the wire go all the way around, twist the wire, and there you go. Now you have a wired pine cone. It's that easy. So now you have basically what I pre-bought just to be a little easier, but you can just wire it yourself like that. Okay, and that's really it. So hopefully this was really fun and a nice way to kind of get creative, to relax, to have a good time. Hopefully not to stress too much about it being perfect or perfectly asymmetrical, because it'll be beautiful no matter what, and every time you look at your door, you'll be like, wow, I can't believe I actually made that myself. And the great thing too is, once the holidays are over and your wreath has passed, you can also save some of these elements. So you can take off the decorative pieces, you can take off the bow, and you can keep your wreath frame. So all you'll do is cut all these wires, and you can just save the frame and reuse it. But while I'm here, let me tell you approximately how many bundles there were. 1, 2, 3. So there's like 11 or 12 bundles is how many we ended up using today. Again, it's always going to be different because of how big your greens are, so it's going to be a little bit different. If you got a kit from us, you'll have enough to definitely make the full wreath and a little extra in case you have little areas where you need a little extra greenery. But that's approximately how many we used. I would say 12, 13 is probably about what you'll use. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this process and had some fun, and looking forward to hosting classes in person and seeing you guys. But in the meantime, I hope this is helpful and fun, and wishing you all a safe, healthy, happy holiday season.